Hey, how's it going everyone? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to my channel. Well, it finally happened. The moment that we've all been waiting for. Bernie Sanders ended his campaign for the presidency.
And there was much rejoicing.
And I ain't even kidding about the rejoicing. Multiple people and entities on the right have been holding metaphorical parades down Madison Avenue because of this news. On social media, it was the wunderkind himself, Ben Shapiro, playing out Sanders' campaign with the Soviet national anthem, and Jordan Rachel reiterating that America would never ever be a socialist country. In the conservative media, the Washington Examiner called Sanders the God who failed, saying that Sanders represented a false beacon of hope to people who had forgotten the human cost of socialism in the 19th and 20th centuries. And National Review said that it was actually really hard to decide what exactly Sanders had accomplished in his two failed runs for the presidency, since he hadn't won, duh, and according to author Dan McLaughlin, he hadn't really changed the Democrat Party to fit his own image. Now, these reactions are perfectly natural. Sanders, as one of the first, and until recently one of the only U.S. politicians to openly and proudly declare himself to be a socialist, has always been seen as a greater threat to the order of things than other politicians, say like Elizabeth Warren or Pete Buttigieg. True, these two might have been leftists, they might have been progressive, but at least they didn't praise communist dictators like Fidel Castro, and they hadn't honeymooned in the USSR either. And given America's opposition to socialism, philosophically, it being seen as contradictory to our ideas of individual rights and voluntary association, as well as historically, that whole Cold War thing and all with the USSR, it is absolutely no surprise that American conservatives would rejoice at the sight of Sanders' campaign finally falling down into flames.
I understand, I get it, it's part of the job, I accept it, right?
But at the risk of being labeled a Johnny Raincloud, this popping of the champagne corks is a little bit premature. In the first place, and to reiterate a point that I made back over the weekend, this really isn't a situation where American conservatives can pat themselves on the back and congratulate themselves on a job well done stopping socialism again. If Bernie Sanders had actually been the Democratic presidential nominee, and if he had gone up against President Trump in the general election in November, and if he had lost to Trump, then sure, that sentiment would be completely valid. But the thing is, this was just a primary. It wasn't the American people. It wasn't even the American electorate. The two are not the same, with the latter being way, way smaller than the former. Choosing someone else over the 78-year-old socialist. This was just registered Democrat voters deciding to partake in their state's primaries or caucuses. And while there might be some out there, most registered Democrat voters are not the people who are going to be listening regularly to Ben Shapiro, Glenn Beck, or any other voice on the right who has been saying nonstop for the last 4 years that America will never be a socialist nation. So there's really nothing of substance for conservatives to congratulate themselves on this time around anyway. It's also premature because while Sanders definitely lost the battle, he almost certainly won the war. Contrary to Dan McLaughlin, writing in National Review, Sanders succeeded entirely in remaking the Democrat Party. In fact, in the height of irony, Sanders is one of the few politicians to actually remake a political party in his image, while at the same time failing at the bid to lead it. This point was illustrated beautifully by John Daniel Davidson in an essay that he wrote at The Federalist. By comparing Sanders and Biden, Davidson showed that while Biden might have been a so-called moderate at some point in his career, he has progressively become Sanderized as time has gone on. For example, Biden used to be a supporter of the Hyde Amendment, the federal law that technically forbids taxpayer money from going to fund abortions. I say technically because Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers still have managed to get their claws on federal money, which then goes towards, you guessed it, abortion. In fact, this was Biden's position for about the last 30 years. Then a phone call from Alicia Milano, plus some conferences with his aides and advisors, and Biden threw all that into the waste bin of history. Now, he's totally for axing the Hyde Amendment and for codifying Roe v. Wade into federal law. Pretty much reinforcing what Sanders said back in February, that there is absolutely no place in the modern Democrat Party for anyone who isn't 100% behind abortion at any stage of a pregnancy for any reason. Biden, again according to Davidson writing at The Federalist, has also embraced other policies that have also been embraced by Bernie Sanders, such as a $15 an hour minimum wage, free universal college, tax hikes on the rich, as well as, and most importantly, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal. In fact, given these changes and flip-flops, Davidson says that Biden is well on his way to becoming the most left-leaning Democratic presidential nominee in our country's history. Just 3 election cycles ago, back in 2008, if any candidate had proposed any of the things that Biden has proposed, his campaign would have been laughed out of existence. The fact that the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee can not only say these things, but actually must embrace these ideas in order to garner support for his campaign shows just how far the Overton window has been pushed to the left in the span of 12 years. Now remember, gang, keep this in mind. All of these ideas are radical with a capital R. None of them are modest, by any stretch of the imagination. As such, theoretically, it's supposed to take a long span of time for these ideas to make their way down to the public square, and then another long span of time for them to actually start garnering support among a good swath of the population. That this all happened in the span of 4,300 days, more or less, is frightening. The conservative movement should really be making a bigger deal about that fact instead of over the headline that another candidate bit the dust. This leads to another point, the youth. It's no secret that Bernie Sanders found a lot of support among younger voters. This was, in fact, a theme that was continually brought up in the news cycle. In an article published in Forbes this past February, Jack Kelly made the argument that a combination of factors, including high debt, low-wage jobs, escalating home and rent costs, as well as the failure of the American education system to teach millennials and Gen Zers about socialism, communism, and the human costs of these systems, had made young voters particularly adept to supporting Sanders. If you are a college graduate with the national average of $40,000 in student loan debt, money that you took out to earn a degree that you now find you can't utilize because the system parroted to you that it didn't matter what you majored in as long as you had that piece of paper, then a guy saying that he is going to cancel your student loan debt, make college free from now on, plus guarantee that you will, at minimum, be making $15 an hour, he's going to have a lot of appeal to a lot of people. But this appeal went beyond economics. In a piece published last October, the New York Times asked why so many young voters were turning towards democratic socialism, the brand of socialism that Bernie Sanders has consistently labeled himself as. And the answers of the young voters who were interviewed for that piece were very illuminating. Nathan Webster, a second-year electrical engineering student at Ohio State, said that he became a democratic socialist because he came from a largely Hispanic town, and he saw the parents of several of his friends get arrested by the Border Patrol for being illegal aliens. Ricky Vehar, an environmental engineering major, became a democratic socialist because he came out as gay and then trans, saying that the system incentivizes discrimination and pushed him towards the left. Nikki Villamacani, a political science major, said that she joined the Democratic Socialists of America rather than the College Democrats because the latter was seen as too centrist, whereas the socialists actually said, this is what we believe and this is what we're going to fight for. Believing that the federal government is the only way to correct injustices, real or imagined, is a powerful reason why so many younger people have made a hard, sharp turn to the left, especially when you consider that the education system has consistently pounded it into their head that America and the West in general have been from time immemorial fundamentally unjust. Hello, 1619 Project. But Nate, the young voters didn't turn out in droves to vote for Sanders. This is 100% correct. The young voters did not come out in droves to vote for Bernie Sanders. Pollster Nate Silver's website, 538.com, remarked that voter turnout for the younger crowd, the swath of the population that was most enthusiastic about Sanders, was no different in 2020 than it was in 2016. Quote, "Instead, participation spiked the most in areas won by former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Senator Amy Klobuchar. Given that their voters were disproportionately college-educated white moderates, this jibes more with our theory that the places where turnout has increased the most in the 2020 Democratic primary are those where Trump-skeptical ex-Republicans are trying a new party on for size." This, combined with the admittedly big mistakes that the Sanders campaign made, such as attacking the Democratic establishment during the primary, while also thinking that it could win by just keeping its own natural base of support and not trying to expand that base of support, definitely contributed to Sanders not winning the prize.
There can be only one.
But this isn't the end of the story. And before we get to that ending, if you're enjoying the video, then take a sec now to subscribe to the channel and ring that bell for notifications so that you will always know when I post new videos about the culture, politics, and religion from a unique POV. It's true, younger voters did not turn out en masse to vote for Bernie Sanders during the primaries. But that really shouldn't give us a whole lot of comfort. In a YouGov poll conducted in 2019, and which was shared ad nauseum by everyone in the conservative commentariat last fall, a full 70% of millennials identify themselves as socialist, saying that they would be more than willing to vote for an openly socialist candidate. Even more worrying is the fact that 64% of Gen Zers, the generation after millennials, and the generation which people like Timecast and Paul Joseph Watson have been arguing is the generation that's going to be the one to finally kill political correctness and restore some semblance of sanity to the world, 64% of them identify as a socialist. Now take these two facts, the leftward lurch of younger voters, as well as the complete transformation of the Democrat Party, and understand this. These two facts are interconnected. Ask yourself this: why are younger voters becoming more and more socialist, becoming more and more comfortable with socialism? Well, one reason, and one that we've already briefly made mention of, is because the education system hasn't taught them, has failed to teach them history, logic, philosophy, anything that could prove to be a firewall against socialism's seductive siren call. But also because intersectionality, present in their education, but also present in their entertainment, whether that's movies, shows, music, books, or magazines, is also pushing them towards ideas and positions where socialism makes the most sense. Every single day, they are overwhelmed with the message that minorities are being oppressed, that America is and always has been fundamentally unjust, that no one cares about the poor and the downtrodden, that the system is antiquated, unfair, and oppressive. The education and entertainment monopolies are not going to change their messaging just because Bernie Sanders suspended his bid for the presidency. They are going to keep selling this message to millennials and Gen Zers who, as older voters start going the way of all flesh, are going to become more and more politically active. But even if that never happens, even if we are guaranteed that America would never ever in 1,000 years elect a socialist president, we really have to take a step back and ask, does that even matter anymore? The American culture has moved steadily to the left for decades now, and as Mark Stein has repeatedly said, a progressive culture is not going to elect a conservative government. for any amount of long time anyway. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't drink a toast to Sanders failing in his bid for the presidency. By all means do so. It's always 5 o'clock somewhere. But we need to temper that celebratory feeling with the realization that defeating socialist candidates, that's the easy part. The real work, the real challenge, is going to be fighting and defeating the socialist spirit that has already taken deep root in our country. But as always, what say you? What are some ways you think that this spirit of socialism can be defeated? As always, let me know your thoughts, ideas, and opinions in the comment box below. Well, that pretty much wraps up everything for this week, gang. Before you go, if you liked the video, make sure to give it a like and share it with your friends on social media. Thank you for watching, for giving me a little bit of your day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and don't forget to dare read, think, speak, and write. I'll see you next time. Ciao.